Story 1, Alone But Not Really, submitted by Shai. I had just got through a rough breakup and decided to take a solo trip to this secluded cabin in the woods. It was one of those off-the-grid places, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me and nature. I thought it would be therapeutic, a chance to heal and rediscover myself. The first day was amazing. I went on a hike, read a book by the fireplace, and just enjoyed the silence. But things got weird by the second night. I was cooking dinner when I heard a knock on the door. I thought it was odd because I was miles away from the nearest town and wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the window, but it was getting dark, and I couldn't see anyone. I opened the door a crack, and there was this man standing there. He looked to be in his 50s, fuzzy beard, and had this unsettling smile. "Hey there," he said. "Sorry to bother you. My car broke down a few miles from here, and I was wondering if I could use your phone." I hesitated. I didn't have a landline, and my cell had no service. "I'm sorry," I replied. "I don't have a working phone here." He seemed to study me for a moment, that smile never leaving his face. "That's all right," he said. "Do you mind if I come in for a bit? It's pretty cold out here." Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. I didn't want to let him in, but I also didn't want to be rude. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that," I said, trying to sound firm. He took a step closer, and I could see his eyes more clearly. They were cold, emotionless. "It's just for a little while," he insisted. I quickly shut the door and locked it. I could hear him outside, muttering to himself. I moved away from the door and tried to stay calm. After what felt like hours, but was probably just a few minutes, the knocking stopped, and everything went silent. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. By morning, I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. As I was packing up my car, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints all around the cabin, as if someone had been circling it throughout the night. And on the driver's side window of my car, there was a message written in the condensation: "See you soon." I drove away as fast as I could and never looked back. I reported the incident to the local police, but they never found the guy. I still wonder what would have happened if I let him in. I've never gone on a solo trip since then, and I doubt I ever will. Story 2, Chills in the Cabin, submitted by Melody. My best friend Lisa and I decided to take a break from our hectic city lives and spend a week in a secluded cabin we found online. It was advertised as the perfect getaway, nestled deep in the woods, no neighbors for miles, and no cell phone service. A digital detox, if you will. The first day was a dream. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun casting golden hues over the dense forest. The cabin was rustic but cozy. We spent the evening on the porch, sipping wine and chatting about everything under the sun. It felt like paradise. The next day, after a long hike, we returned to the cabin and found a note on the door. It was scribbled in hasty handwriting: "Nice place you have here. Be careful." We laughed it off, thinking maybe it was just a joke from the cabin owner or a previous guest. But looking back, I wished we had taken it more seriously. That night, as we were settling into bed, we heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps. We both froze, listening intently. The footsteps seemed to circle the cabin, getting closer, and then softer. We tried to convince ourselves it was just an animal, but deep down, we knew it wasn't. Suddenly, there was a loud bang at the door. We both screamed. I grabbed a baseball bat we found earlier, and Lisa clutched a kitchen knife. We waited, hearts pounding. There was only silence. After what felt like hours, we mustered the courage to check outside. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone. We double-checked all the locks and tried to calm ourselves down, telling each other that it was probably just some local kids trying to scare the out-of-towners. The next morning, we decided to cut our trip early and go home. But before we could pack up and leave, our car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. With no cell service and the nearest town miles away, we felt trapped. As the day wore on, we became increasingly paranoid. Every rustle in the trees, every creak in the cabin made us even more scared. By evening, we were a mess. We decided to stick together and sleep in the living room, close to the exit. Around midnight, we heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were accompanied by a low humming sound, like someone singing a lullaby. The footsteps stopped right outside the window. We dared not to look. Then, a face appeared pressed against the glass. It was a man, older with wild eyes and a twisted smile. He just stared at us, humming that eerie tune. We were paralyzed with fear, but then Lisa remembered the flare gun we had seen in the emergency kit. Without a word, she grabbed it and fired it straight out the window. The bright red flare lit up the night, and the man, caught off guard, stumbled back and ran into the woods. We didn't waste a second. Grabbing our bags, we bolted out of the cabin and started a long trip to the nearest town. It felt like we walked for hours, constantly looking over our shoulders, expecting to see that man following us. But he never reappeared. By morning, we reached the town and got help. The locals told us that there had been reports of a hermit living in the woods, a man who was once a resident but had gone mad after a personal tragedy. They believed he was harmless, but we knew better. Story 3: Mysterious Escape. Submitted by Nina. My best friend Sarah and I decided to take a break from our hectic city lives and spend a week in this secluded cabin we found online. It was advertised as the perfect getaway, surrounded by dense woods and a serene lake nearby. The pictures looked amazing, and the reviews were all positive. We thought, why not? We arrived at the cabin on a sunny afternoon. It was even more beautiful than the pictures. The woods around it seemed to stretch endlessly, and the silence was almost deafening. Save for the occasional chirping of birds and rustling leaves, we were ecstatic. We went hiking, had picnics by the lake, and spent our evenings by the fireplace, sipping on wine and chatting about everything under the sun on our first 2 days. But on the third night, things took a turn. We were in the middle of a movie marathon when we heard a knock at the door. It was around 11 p.m. We weren't expecting anyone, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances. "Who could that be at this hour?" she whispered. I approached the door cautiously and peeped through the window next to it. There was a man standing outside. He looked to be in his 40s, scruffy beard, wearing a tattered jacket and holding a lantern. He didn't look threatening, but the situation was definitely odd. I cracked the door open slightly. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound confident. "My car broke down a few miles from here," he replied, his voice raspy. "I saw the lights from your cabin. Can I use your phone to call for help?" Sarah, always the more cautious one, whispered to me, "Don't let him in. I'll get the phone." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the man. "Just a moment," I told him. Sarah handed me our old landline phone. The cabin didn't have great cell reception. I stretched the cord as far as it could go and handed the phone to the man, making sure he stayed outside. He made a call, speaking in hushed tones. After a few minutes, he handed the phone back, thanking us and saying that help was on the way. Then he walked off into the darkness. Relieved, we locked the door and tried to get back to our movie. But the atmosphere had changed. We were on edge. About an hour later, there was another knock. We froze. I approached the door again, and to our relief, it was a police officer. "Evening, ladies," he greeted. We received a call about a stranded motorist. We found his car, but he wasn't there. "Did he come here?" We nodded, explaining the situation. The officer's face turned serious. "Do you have any idea who that man was?" We shook our heads. He sighed. "That man escaped from a nearby correctional facility 2 days ago. He's been convicted of multiple violent crimes. We've been searching for him." Our hearts dropped. The realization that we had been so close to potential danger was terrifying. The officer assured us they increased patrols in the area and advised us to leave first thing in the morning. We didn't need any convincing. We packed up and left at the crack of dawn.